To say it's an honor to have Diane Seuss here joining us is an understatement. My introduction to Diane was last Christmas. My daughter gave me a copy of Modern Poetry saying, "Mum, you'll love it." And that was another understatement. And what I love is the questions she raises, her authenticity. This is a poet I know I can trust, who voices her flaws and doubts and invites us to accompany her on her journey of examining them objectively without attempting to resolve them with answers. There's also the question of her form, her style, the music of her language, her humour, her line breaks, but enough of that. We want to hear from Diane. So briefly, Diane's bio. Diane Seuss is the author of 6 poetry collections, her most recent being Modern Poetry and Sonnets, which have both been republished. So this is the version I've got, but they've both been republished this year by Fitzcarraldo Editions. Diane's won umpteen awards, including the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Award Prize, and the Penn Volker Prize. She was a 2020 Guggenheim Fellow and in 2021 received the John Updike Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She's also Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and has a Master in Social Work. For many years, she was writer in residence at the Kalamazoo College and is a visiting professor of Colorado University. She lives in Michigan. Diane's 7th collection, Althea Poems, is due out from Grey Wolf Press in 2027. So welcome, Diane.
Thank you so much. Thanks. That's a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Oh, it's our complete joy and pleasure. And perhaps we could start with you reading the title poem from your most recent collection, Modern Poetry.
I'm happy to do so. So this poem actually takes place or looks back on my first poetry course in college called Modern Poetry. And the cover image that you held up, that's the girl I was when I took that first poetry course.
Try to show it again. It's really beautiful.
Mm. Modern poetry. It was what I'd been waiting for my whole life, but I wasn't ready for poetry. I didn't have the tools. Rethke, I appreciated the greenhouse poems, and decades later saw his bed, toilet, upright piano in that desolate town where he was raised, not unlike the desolate town where I was raised. No greenhouse in my town, but the green giant factory where mushrooms grew on cow shit. Wallace Stevens, I wrote a paper on loneliness in Jersey City, having no clue what he meant by the deer and the dachshund are one, and got an A anyway by faking it. The professor made us read Sunday Morning, which struck me as long. I couldn't focus yet. I was 18. A poem against heaven, he told us. Is there no change of death in paradise? Does ripe fruit never fall? That I could understand, having known some plums and that icky, sweet smell of a dead mouse in the wall. Gerard Manley Hopkins, not modern per se, but my professor said one of the first modernists. So what did modern poetry really mean? Maybe just fucked up, as Hopkins was for sure, and tongue twistery and depressed, Jesuit, maybe bipolar. I stared at his photograph, the long nose and cleft in his chin, noticed that even in no worst there is none, he had the wherewithal to put in the accent marks, to school us as to how to hear the thing. And WCW Williams. My roommate and I called him Billy C. Billy Goat. I knew something of wheelbarrows, old women, and, as I said, plums, but the prof showed us how complicated it all really was. The whole no ideas but in things thing, the near rhymes, depends and chickens and red. Again, I was not yet capable of being smart and wondered if I ever would be. Though I kept getting A's on the papers, maybe because the professor felt sorry for me, and I'm not just saying that. The final modern poet was Sylvia Plath, a woman, blonde, and I didn't trust blondes. Smart, angry, angry at men, I was told, depressed, cheated on, dead. I imagined her being in modern poetry with us, mopping the floor with us, with her developed mind, her ooh and ah sounds, her thesis, The Magic Mirror, on the double in Dostoevsky. I pictured her calling me a charlatan, like Gaylord did in class the week we studied her. He called her a charlatan psychopath and me a charlatan for sticking up for her. I had to go back to the dorm and look up charlatan in the dictionary. A fraud, the dictionary said, a quack. Which, yes, I was, though so was Gaylord. Who isn't a quack at 18? I wanted to love Sylvia, but to love her would mean loving someone who would have hated me. It would be a few years after I flunked out of college until I took a class called Women's Literature at the public university down the hill with a teacher named Stephanie, who looked a lot like Francoise Sagan, teenage author of Bonjour Tristesse, but older and with a cap of gray hair. Margaret Atwood, Toni Morrison, Adrienne Rich, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Plath, Sexton, Lord, Kate Chopin, Alice Walker, Juna Barnes. I was beginning to understand, but barely. To ask a pertinent question now and then, like where the hell was Langston Hughes in modern poetry? Dickinson in 19th century American lit? If Hopkins was a modernist, how about Dickinson with her weird rhymes and what Galway Canal called her inner speech-like, sliding, syncopated rhythm, a counterpoint to her iambic lines, a horse straining at the bit in the direction of free verse. A woman who drove a motorcycle to women's literature, wore a fringed black leather jacket, and worked at the Kalamazoo airport in the booth where people pay for parking, was shot and killed there by her ex-boyfriend. From then on, the class became something else. Stephanie had us over to her house, a damp place in the woods. She roasted a goat and served it to us, shredded on blue plates. The books had become more and less important. We spoke of them, huddled on the floor by the fire. I remember most of all the bushel baskets of apples and grapes for winemaking, drawing fruit flies. I'm not complaining. It was all more than I deserved. The goat, the greenhouse, the liberated blonde badass on her motorcycle, Sula, surfacing, Sunday morning, ripe plums, my education.
That's a beautiful reading, Diane. Thank you so much. I love that poem. And you tell us a lot about your introduction into the world of poetry. But I wonder, did you, in your childhood, could you say a little bit about, I think your mother did a literature degree after your father died. Did she read poetry to you?
Mm, such a great question. My mom, um, I'm writing about her now actually because she had to just be in her business. Um, she was not allowed to go to college when she graduated from high school. Her parents didn't have the money. But they did send her to a course in shorthand so she could be a secretary. And she went one time and then pretended to go, but really walked around uh, um, a huge greenhouse for flowers. And that's what she did instead of learning shorthand. But when my father died, she was a young widow with two kids and no way to support us. And so she decided she would go to college, that adventure. And so she was too busy to read to me. It wasn't like that. She wasn't that kind of nurturer. She was a role model, but she also kind of assumed, or expected you're going to have to create your own meaning. And so she did bring books into the house. And I did begin to look at those spines on the bookshelf, Virginia Woolf, Joseph Conrad, the Romantic poets, John Keats. I wasn't ready for them. I was a child, but I realized there was this dimension beyond what I had been living. Um, so I read really young and I began to read poems on my own. Um, I loved nursery rhymes. I loved rhyme. I loved, there's a poem by Longfellow, The Wreck of the Hesperus, which I absolutely adored and read over and over again for its rhymes and also for the situation of the daughter who's lashed to the mast of this ship in a storm by her father and dies that way. And when she washes up on shore, her eyes are crystalled over with salt. I never got that image out of my mind. So I was kind of, feral, and my entry into literature was a feral entryway.
That's a really beautiful description of how how important reading was for you, because it gave you an entry to another world. But it also seems to typify where there's a lot of reference to solitude and loneliness and things like that in your work, and also death. And so I wonder if you could say a little bit about this, because in your Frank sonnets, you say there's a line, you say, I lived so close to death, I got inured to it. And there was
Hmm.
something about how death is just, so death and solitariness, you say loneliness is a rich experience. So if you could just sort of say a little
Mm,
about those.
yes. I remember when I went through a really awful divorce and I was walking around the block and I ran into a friend who was going through a breakup and I asked, who dumped who, and she said, "Oh, I decided I need my loneliness."
Mhm.
And that notion, looking back, I think I always needed my loneliness. I like to play alone. I like to imagine alone. Um, I believe that writers need solitude. I think it's hard for younger writers now to get that, to have that, to even experience it. But yeah, it was, I was raised in small places, that in a village really, and we lived right next door to the cemetery. So I would wander through the cemetery every day by myself. Things now we wouldn't allow a child to do that. But and read the stones and listen in on the grievers and um, you know, I think the natural world was a source of mystery and respite. There was a cave in the cemetery where they kept the bodies in the winter because they couldn't get the shovel down into the ground. And so I would try the padlock, but it was always locked. So it was adventure in a sense. It was lonely, but I guess I didn't think things ought to be some other way. It
Yeah.
was it was just the way it was. And with that loneliness came introspection, and with that loneliness came imagination, and the ability to sort of stay with ideas and images and feelings beyond the moment, to really sort of build a theory of the world and myself. And maybe that's what poets need to do at some point.
That's really interesting, and yeah, I can see that because what I said earlier was that what I find comes across so strongly in your poetry is your authenticity, your generosity, and even your humility. Sometimes you even name yourself, and you say your work has always emerged from your life with personal material, personal experiences, material much like clay in pottery. So I wonder, how easy is it for you to be exposed, to expose yourself on the page? And I think somewhere you wrote that modern poetry was the hardest book you wrote, and I just wonder what was hard about it.
Oh boy. I was in a place, it was during the pandemic and during what is continuing to go on here in this country politically, which is very disheartening and scary to say the least. And because of the pandemic, I was pretty much isolated in my house. And isolated is different from solitude, as you well know. Um, and I found myself in despair. It's hard to write poems out of despair. I think Gerard Manley Hopkins did it with his terrible sonnets. But it's not easy. You have to, because I thought about this a lot while writing modern poetry. There has to be something generating the energy in poems. And maybe that something is not in a sentimental way, but hope of some kind. And I was feeling pretty hopeless. So I had to set myself up for a project, so to speak, of a book that would bypass anything or move forth from anything I had done before and acknowledge this new reality. The question that was sitting at the center of me was, can poetry still matter? This thing I've devoted my life to, this thing that's pretty much what I have to show for my life. Does it does it mean? Can it mean? And that was the question that carried me through this book. And I didn't go in thinking, oh, yeah, of course it does. And now I'll prove it. Instead, I went in thinking, I don't know. And maybe through the course of the book, I'll figure it out. And I think I do, but it's a hard one figuring. Um, yeah, it was a feeling almost of exile. And I was also writing long. I had written frank sonnets before modern poetry, so 14 lines, compressed form, telling the story of my life. Looking back now, this was before so many of the things I mentioned that are such struggles now. It feels sort of wonderfully free and naive to be able to do that. But modern poetry required something else, a longer form, free verse, no compression, writing past the obvious ending of poems, and finding my way toward, I guess, a way to keep being alive.
Yeah. I hear that. No, that's really beautifully expressed, and yeah, certainly death, as I said earlier, is there's a lot of death in this, but from an existential perspective, an inquiry into what it means and what lasts, and obviously your epigraph and you have an epigraph from Keats at the start of modern poetry, and Keats does feature in quite a few of your books. Generally, I think he's been a very big presence in your life. So, and there's something about how he died young, like your father. And I'm thinking of the last poem in the book, which I'm going to ask you to read right at the end of this, where your friend points out all Keats's physical flaws, despite his ability to write about truth and beauty. And I'm wondering if you were exploring a similar sort of parallel, um, like you call it objective, but it feels very raw because you sometimes describe yourself in rather unflattering terms, and yet you also write poetry of beauty and truth. And so I just wondered about that because I'm going to ask you in a minute to read the next poem. But I just wonder if you had anything to add about that.
Mm, yeah, well, I decided early on not to be the hero of my poems. I'm not a hero. I've, in any sense of the word, I've endured, and in that sense, we're all heroes. But um, I feel like if I have a power, it's in assessing myself honestly. And this book was a self-confrontation. So yes, I do at times in these poems say, Diane, I talk to myself, die, um, which a lot of people call me die. Um, uh, yeah, I'm, confronting myself, um, calling myself out, demanding my honesty. Um, the the most difficult thing to write, I did write in Frank Sonnet, which is the sort of story of my son's serious addiction to street drugs for over a decade and his near death on many occasions, and what it was as a single parent by then to find my way through it with him. And we're still doing that. Um, so I think if I had any remaining arrogance, there's nothing like addiction to blow that out of the water. And so now I'm into truth with Keats and the definition of beauty, which is, truth is beauty. Beauty is truth. That's all I know and all I need to know.
That's beautiful, and it's really heartfelt. I mean, the thing is that a lot of your poems they really go straight to the heart, the soul. There's a line in Pop Song, which I'm going to ask you to read now, which always brings tears to my eyes. What father would want me for a daughter? So I don't know if you want to say anything about that or just read it because it's such, yeah, I love that poem.
Yeah, I think about that. Like, I, because I'm fatherless, maybe that allowed me a certain freedom about how I define myself and my gender expression. I had a mother who was um, pretty unconventional as well in the way she walked through the world and took care of herself and everything. And so I really think, when I think about if I met my father now, am I the kind of daughter he would have even understood or wanted? Um, and that seemed like pretty honest question.
I
So
think
I'll read it.
you'd be very proud.
I hope so. I hope so. I was proud of him, that's for sure. Pop song. And that reminds me, many of the poems in modern poetry, the titles come from various kinds of music, from rhapsody to pop song to cowpunk to aria, musical forms, musical definitions. And so this is pop song. I met my father again in a video store by the creamery, in a record store on my lunch break, in a museum whisper booth, in Washington Square performing with a Beatles cover band. And he said to me, "Di," he said, "you're not what I expected." Like an online date who doesn't think you measure up to the photograph. I think he meant I turned out differently than he imagined when I was 3 and I'd already learned to read the newspaper. "Di," he said, and I saw in his face, well, what father would want me for a daughter? It was as if God looked upon creation and wondered at its atrocities. How, God thinks, could I have fucked up so badly, but keeps it to himself? "Die," my father said. We were in the lamb barn of a county fair. The lamb's fleece was matted. They bleated piteously. My father hadn't aged a day, black hair combed in a wave in the front you could lose yourself in. Children are known to accept their parents' hairstyles without question, no basis yet to judge. I'm not sure he was glad to see me. To a dead man, a living adult daughter must be such an overwhelm, a real load. And from death, he had learned to prefer simplicity, the ephemera of steam rising from a cup, birds, but he didn't care what kind of birds. He was wearing a humble but clean shirt. He wanted, I believe, to keep it that way. I was like a cake with too many ingredients that has overflowed its pan, spilled into the oven, and smoldered there. "Die," he said. I could tell he had a mint lozenge in his mouth, one of those that winnows but never really goes away. It wasn't a sheep barn after all where we met up. It was a diner, and he did a spin on his stool at the counter as if to entertain me, as fathers are apt to do, or so I've been told. "It's too late for me to be beautiful," I said, "the ruin too vast," for I assumed he wanted beauty. Don't fathers want beauty from their daughters? How ashamed he was of my exploits. A nuanced man had lost in death all nuance. In fact, the dead don't love the living. Like Jesus, they judge us. "Die," was all he said. "Nice to see you."
Thank you so much, Dan. That's beautiful. Yeah, I was
That's a complicated poem. Yeah,
well, all
I,
your poems are all very multi-layered. And so it's just, you can sit with it for ages. Um, yeah, that's really beautiful. Um,
thank you.
I was going to say something about the music actually, because you said somewhere also, all I have to do is put on music and I know where I am poetry wise. And that you say you came to poetry largely through music. So I wonder if you could say something about the importance of music and other influences.
Yes, well, I remember right after my father died, he had been in the Navy during World War II. He got his high school diploma after the Navy and met my mother, and they got married within months. And he went to college. and he became a teacher. And okay, where was I going? Remind me what you were at, what you asked me
Well, I was
again.
asking about music. And
Oh, yes. Yes. So that he died. I was 7. And within a couple days, one of his students came to the house and she brought my sister and me a gift. And it was the Beatles' first album, Meet the Beatles
yeah,
in the US. And it really was a treat. I mean, I felt like I'd heard them on the radio. Um, and whatever they offered in their vitality, in their liveliness, in their creativity, in their jokiness and trickster qualities, it was a trade for a dad.
yeah.
And I could feel this affinity for them. I had fantasies of them coming to my house and me cooking them dinner. Isn't that like gender
Oh,
perfect? Uh, I wrapped baked potatoes in aluminum foil.
right.
Uh, but so rock and roll was what we had access to where I lived. You could hear the radio, you could find these singers, and as I got into high school, it was people like Janis Joplin singing this ragged blues, and um, you know, um, that was probably more influential, really, music to me than anything on the page.
Yeah.
So when I first started writing, I started typing poems in my typing class, which girls had to take, so we could go be secretaries. Um, and I picked up typing fast, and my typing teacher said, "You can do whatever you want." And I started doing poems. And what I was hearing was rock and roll, you know.
Really.
And so when I got to modern poetry, I really don't know much about other forms of music. So when I decided on these forms, I had to learn, like, what is a rhapsody? How does an aria sound? Um, and how do I take these sort of high musical forms and bring them down to who and where and what I'm from and what I tend to deal with in my poems? It was an interesting tension.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And you, I mean, you hear the music in the language as well, and in the rhythm and everything else. So I mean, that comes across, and in the rhyme. So, but do I get the impression that you compose a lot of your poetry in your head as you're walking the dog, counting syllables on fingers and things? So does
I do.
it arrive almost fully formed on the page?
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of people, we don't have the luxury to only do one thing. And since I've been writing and single parenting and having to earn a living and cook and clean and all that crap, and walk a dog, a lot of the time, lines come to me as I'm doing other things, and then I kind of build them as I'm walking. Um, Even I'm remembering when my third book, Four-Legged Girl, I was walking the dog and I saw white violets in the ground, and I thought white violets, not so much an image as, and it started there. And by the time I got home, I had a pretty significant amount of poem written, and then I had to keep going over it to remember it, and it became almost like oral tradition, something that I used the language to be able to remember, what I was doing. The first poem in Frank's sonnets came that way too. I was driving and I was literally narrating what I was doing. I drove all the way to Cape Disappointment. Um, but and had to stop along the roadside to pee. What's wrong with my bladder? I'm talking to myself and remembering. And when I got back to where I was staying, I had this poem that could well fit in 14 lines. And that's when I thought, I could write unrhymed for the most part sonnets. So much of I don't set out to do things so much as things rise up as I'm
Yeah.
living, as I'm just living.
So could I ask a tiny bit about your process then? So I know you've explained how it comes about, but do you have a trusted friend you share work with? Or I mean, maybe workshop groups or a thing of the past or something. I just wonder if it remains a very solitary thing that you do your own editing and maybe you don't need to do too much.
Yeah, I share work once it's done with, I have a few people who I trust.
Mm.
My mom at 96, who's still with us and very sharp. My son, who's the my best reader, because he can tell when I'm bullshitting. And then a couple other friends. Um, one a writer, one not a writer, but they get it. Um, and otherwise, then my editor is sort of is the recipient of my work once I have a bunch and forming it into a manuscript. But yes, what you're referencing is true. I've been doing it so long that I'm sort of like, as I'm writing, I'm revising. As I'm revising, I'm critiquing. So those roles are all internalized by now.
Okay, yeah, I get that, and that sounds really beautiful that you've got both your son and your mother working on this. I
Yeah,
love that's very.
yes. And he's such a good reader, and he can hear one off word and he's always right?
That is a gift. And I was also going to say, because there was somewhere I read somewhere that it took 10 years between your first and second book, that you couldn't get it published. You'd send it out and send it out, fix it, make it better, send it out again. And yet, eventually, this one ended up winning the Juniper Prize, Wolf Lake White Gown Blown Up Open. And I just wonder what keeps you going, what advice you'd offer, because we're coming towards the end of our time together chatting. So I just wondered what advice you could give all our listeners.
Yes, well, I think now more than when I was coming up, there's such a focus on the work as a product. And, people will put on social media, I was rejected again. I'm rejected, rejected. I was accepted. I was rejected. And I don't think that's very helpful because it's very easy then to start writing toward acceptance rather than toward what you're actually in the business of doing on the page. And sometimes, when I have changed up, what I'm doing. For a while, people don't take those poems. It's interesting. Um, people have to kind of come along for the ride after a while. But yeah, for 10 years, that book wasn't taken, but I never wrote in order to be published. My reasons were other than that. By then, I wanted to be published. I thought it could be a good book. Um, but uh, it's not my entire purpose. And so my advice is just to keep chipping away. D don't reject your own vision for acceptance, certainly. And but do listen to good advice. So, for instance, when Wolf Lake was going out and getting rejected, one panel of editors, and they were all men, wrote me and said, there are too many divorce poems. And my first response was, "Urgh," you know. But then I thought, okay, take that in, Diane, take that in. And I got rid of some and I made some that came across that way larger or more archetypal. And it worked. It made the book better. So even advice that rankles you can be good. Take it in before you reject it too quickly. And do the work. Do the work. Do the work that's in front of you. Remember the what it's one of the few areas in our lives now in which what we're doing is not about capitalism. It's not
Mm.
about selling. Poems don't make us money anyway. It's not about, the big reward. It's about something much more important than that. So stick with that. And, you know, your destiny in terms of being understood and met where you live on the page is anybody's guess, but I think your best bet is to stay true to what you're hearing, to the music that you're inventing for yourself.
Yeah, wise words, really beautiful words. Yeah, that's I don't think there's anything else to be said. Just write your truth, right?
Yeah, write your truth. And, I write my central themes, as you said, are, um, lonely, deathy, rural. I'm in the US, rural Midwestern woman poet. Being published at all is very unusual. Um, the it tends to be coastal, it tends to be urban, it tends to be um, from the halls of academia. So my writing career is unlikely as hell, you know. Um, but I did stay true to where I'm from and who I am. Terry Tempest Williams has a line in one of her books. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay home.
Mm.
And that's what my imagination has done. It's traveled far from that nexus, but you know, I am who who and what made me. I am those experiences. I'm the kid in the cemetery. That's what I have to offer. Take it or leave it.
Thank you. And it's been such a joy talking to you. And I'm going to take you back to the cemetery now because I'm going to ask you to read The Romantic Poet, which closes modern poetry. And then after that, I'll hand over to Leslie and she'll have some questions for you if that's all right. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Oh, I've loved this. You're wonderful. I wish we were, just hanging out together
You
and I
too.
could hear your stuff. Thank you. But yeah, this is very short, unlike the other two poems. Um, and Keats is known, died very young and wrote an amazing poem about the nightingale. So that's all you need to know. It's called Romantic Poet. You would not have loved him, my friend, the scholar decried. He brushed his teeth, if at all, with salt. He lied and rarely washed his hair, wiped his ass with leaves or with his hand. The top of his head would have barely reached your tits. His pits reeked, as did his deathbed. But the nightingale, I said, thank you.
Thank you, Diane. That was just wonderful to hear it in your voice. Okay, Leslie,
Thank you.
you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both for a wonderful conversation. And we do have a question. We've got a couple of questions actually straight in. So from Hilary McDaniel Douglas, She asks, continuing on the theme of the American sonnet, what did that form become for you? Does it have a lineage shared with traditional American unrhymed sonnets? How did it help kickstart your next book and all the other forms? So that's kind of three questions in one question. I think it's
Yeah,
about the
well,
sonnet.
the American sonnet does have a tradition, but it's pretty recent tradition. Wanda Coleman was maybe the first practitioner who named it jazz sonnet or American sonnet. Um, Gerald Stern wrote a book called American Sonnets, and his sonnets weren't even 14 lines. They were like, whatever. I talked to him about it once, and 16, 20 lines. So what made them sonnets? And I had to figure that out because I love the book. So there, and then Terrence Hayes and I were sort of writing at the same time his book of American sonnets and mine. So there was that history, but when I started, I wasn't thinking of any of that. I was thinking about Frank O'Hara, which is why the book of sonnets is called Frank colon sonnets. Um, and I was thinking about Frank O'Hara's spontaneous, I do this, I do that, as he called them, poems. Um, so, I'm walking down the street, I'm noticing this, I'm hearing that. And so that probably drove me more than any history of American sonneting. What was the rest of that question?
The question was, did it have a lineage shared with traditional American Renaissance? You've kind of covered that. And also, how did it help kickstart your next book and all the other forms? That was the last.
Right. So after Frank Sonnets, the next book was Modern Poetry. And I knew that I couldn't do what I had already done. I don't like doing what I've already done. I couldn't write more sonnets, even though that would have been nice because they give you a template. But it it kickstarted me. I have to confess that winning the Pulitzer for it and other sorts of recognition that came um, absolutely unexpectedly. Maybe it kickstarted me into feeling that I had the right to kind of weigh in on poetry, um, and to think about poetry's efficacy if it holds up. So maybe all of that sort of kickstarted me into modern poetry.
Hmm, lovely. All right, we've got another question from Nicolette, who wants to know, do you have any advice for young poets? Is there anything specifically that has made you a better poet?
Mm. Well, I was lucky to come up in a time when, you know, I could wander and I could, my primary friends were my senses. Um, the world coming in directly into my senses. And it is difficult for the younger poet to have that experience now for a number of reasons. The, you know, the screens are everywhere. There's no getting rid of them. Um, so my advice is as much as you can kind of buck the trend and not take your sense of reality, not take your experience from screens, but from the actual world, which I'm looking at right now, coming streaming in through my windows. Those are the sources of image and metaphor and detail. It's very hard to get image and metaphor and detail from a screen. Um, Maybe there's no way to put the genie back in the bottle on that, but I would urge you to take time every day and periods of time in your life to experience the world directly without mediation from anything other than your own imagination.
Thank you. We've
Hmm.
also got a question from Maeve McKenna. She would like to know about how to identify feedback that's useful versus that which might be harmful to our creativity.
That's a good one, and it's really tough. Um, I think I was always a little stubborn. I had a vision, and I knew um, when I think it was when I was being asked to conform in a certain way. I I kind of tossed that aside. I had a mentor in college, Conrad Hilberry, a poet, and no, I always trusted him. Um, and I was willing to take his advice to heart because he didn't slather me with it. It was, he gave it when he really thought he needed to. So I think it's just, you have to, in order to get advice and direction, I think you need to go to that experience with some confidence in what you're doing. You have to know yourself a bit. You can't just walk into that and, you know, vulnerable to the whim of, they don't generally know more than you do about what's right in a poem. And sometimes that workshop mentality can work against improvisation and, you know, creativity in the broadest sense of the word. Don't fold to old ways of doing things, even mine. Um, so I think it's a crapshoot. Take it home, think on it, write it down. Don't be arrogant about it, but think it through before you adopt anybody else's ideas about you and your work.
Mm, Lovely, thank you. We've also got a question from a budding female poet, also from rural Michigan, Dawn Levitt. And she wonders if you could give some insights on how to identify. Oh, sorry, if you could, it's just the chat moved. If you could give her advice on where to publish a collection of her work. She's had a few dozen poems accepted, but have found no appetite for a collection.
Yeah, interesting. Well, um, that's really tough. I would say my publisher, Gray Wolf Press, is a Midwest, one of those rare, it's a Midwestern publication house. It's in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But I don't know that that makes them more open or less open to, writing from the rural. I think, it's important to think about and maybe to get some rare but important input on what it is you're doing beyond sort of the placement of your where your poems are placed. So wherever you're from, if you're from New York City, London, or Edwardsburg, Michigan, your poems have to sort of use the place itself as your metaphor source, as your narrative source. But the poems also have to gain largesse, have to be bigger than that, or take broader imaginative leaps, no matter what it is that made you. So it's both. So look at the manuscript with that in mind. Maybe get some judicious advice. And then, I don't know your age or anything. You might not be ready to publish a book. It might be time to just generate more work. I didn't, I confess, I did not publish a book until I was 40 years old. 40 years old. And I didn't seek it. Uh, a publisher was just starting up and they asked me for a manuscript. Um, So that wasn't my primary aim. So, get some good advice. and then, and keep trying. Keep trying. You'll know when you're ready by the quality of what you're producing and by your confidence in it.
Mm. Thank you.
It takes time, though. It takes time. It's not going to be snapped up immediately. I remember sending Wolf Lake White Gown Blown Open out and to the Walt Whitman Award at the Academy of American Poets. And I really believed I would probably win, which I did not, you know, but like, it's hard. There's so much competition. Don't take that to heart and make you not believe in who you are and where you're from and what you write.
Mm.
Just keep going. And remember what's most important is the writing itself and you and you.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful advice. And I'm sure we'd all like to thank Diane and Mary for such a wonderful and insightful conversation. Perhaps we could just show our silent appreciation and really wonderful to hear such a wide range of poems and ideas about poetry. Really interesting. So thank you
Thank you so much. Thank you.
all.
Thank you, Mary.
So
Thank you.
welcome.
And to everybody who helped make this happen.